And we came across Predixa about a year ago, and Paula and her team, and really just loved the work they were doing, particularly from an organizational transformation perspective, very rapidly able to assess companies and look for the low-hanging fruit in terms of where we're able to help and deal with issues that your employees are really telling you are the issues within the business. So quite often leaders think they know what all the issue. So that was the one side of Predixa we really liked, but there was also the other side, which has become such an important aspect in today's world, and that's the whole area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. And Predixa also have a module that really measures this within businesses. And as we start going into areas where the ESG principles, the Millennium Development Goals, etc., become more and more important in the minds of investors into companies, of clients, particularly with the younger generation that is looking for more, sort of openness within organizations. The prediction module really helps on that as well. But that's not the main thing we're here today about. It's not so much about what does the tool do, but more about introducing Paula, who to me, Paula sits in leaders in the whole world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Spent a lot of time at the Dubai Expo 2020 talking about this. There was a pavilion just specifically for women this year, and Paula spent a lot of time talking at different meetings. So very happy to hand over to Paula as an introduction. Let her, wow us with her knowledge around the diversity, equity, inclusion, and how this becomes really a business imperative and a business, where it actually drives business results. And later on, I'll most probably also just pop in and ask Paula a couple of questions. I've got some really tough ones for you today, Paula, so no, I'm joking. So over to you, Paula. Over to you, Paula. Thanks very much for joining us from sunny Dubai, where it's always sunny.
Oh, thank you very much, Miles, and thank you, Colleen, and welcome to everyone from Business Engage. I can see we've got a wonderful number of people on the call. Yes, I mean, we've been working with Miles for a while now, but in terms of the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as Miles has said, that is growing and growing in importance. I have to say that I have been involved in this field for over 30 years, which gives you an idea of how old I am. But when I started my career, I worked for in the buying departments of two retailers, Marks and Spencer's and Next in the UK. And one of the issues back in the late 80s and early 90s was that those two retailers were really spearheading the principles of ethical supply chains. They were out on their own. And so it meant that I would go to potential factories and suppliers where the product was great and the price was something that we could work with. But I didn't approve them because it was clear that they didn't value their workforce and that there were issues with safety. There were issues with health and well-being. There were issues with discrimination, etc. And so that's one of the areas that gave me the experience. But equally, actually, I was thinking back in preparation for this that and I've recently been back in the UK to see my parents, and I was sitting at the desk and I had a mug next to me and it had fair trade on it. And to be honest, my mother has been an advocate of fair trade for the last 50 odd years or so. Whilst I'm at home, there's not a drop of coffee or a piece of chocolate or a piece of banana or a piece of orange that doesn't pass my lips unless it's come from a fair trade, a fairly traded supplier. So this whole principle of the principles around diversity, equity, and inclusion are something that's very much shaped me for many, many years. So I bring that level of experience, of practical experience as well. And I think that as Miles said, we work together, and the company Predixa basically is we provide diversity, equity and inclusion focused consulting. We use our own AI-driven diagnostic applications, but basically we help organizations rapidly achieve their social and financial benefits or targets. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you a case study, an example to show what I mean. So when I moved into consulting, I was working for a client and they wanted to, there was actually a bed company, a bed manufacturing company, and they wanted some complimentary bed linen. So I was sourcing, trying to source these, and I was dealing with an agent who was based in Hong Kong, but he said to me, told me very excitedly, he'd found this fantastic factory in northeast China in a place called Qingdao, and that they did fantastic embroidered bed linen, and he wanted me to come and have a look at it. So we went and did the tour. And of course, the work was unbelievable. The product was absolutely beautiful. But I asked if I could see the workers' accommodation, and people looked a little bit uncomfortable and, you know, shifting from side to side. Anyway, I went to see that, and it was awful. I mean, I should say that in certain countries in the world, of course, you know, particularly large countries, people will live and work at the factory. So in China, for instance, it's very, very common for people to live in accommodation and then go home for what amounts to sort of a couple of weeks at the end of February for Chinese New Year, and then a week in October when the factory is closed for a week. So it's very normal to have workers' accommodation, but the kitchen facilities were awful. The bathroom facilities were woeful. And when I asked, you know, how the members of staff could get a decent shower, I was told quite openly that it was only a 5-kilometer walk into town, and they could use the shower facilities at the local swimming pool. And then the recreation area for the children who went to the rather simple school that they had, these were the children of married couples who worked for the organisation. That was simply a bare area of concrete with what amounted to a sort of 2 channels running down of wastewater, which was almost like an open sewer. So anyway, that evening over dinner, the agent and the factory owner excitedly said, "So, Paula, you know, what did you think?" And I said, "Well, I thought the product was fantastic." "Yes, yes." "And the price, well, we need to negotiate, but I don't think we're too far off." And, "Oh, great, great. Well, let's talk numbers then." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to place any orders." And they looked very surprised. And I said, "Because it's clear that you don't care for your staff, and it's very, very short-sighted of you. Because if you invested in your workforce and you improved your workers' accommodation, you would not only keep your best embroiderers, you would attract the best embroiderers from your competitors, which would give you competitive advantage. That would also increase your potential to take on more work, which means that would increase your revenues. And because of economies of scale, that means would increase your profitability, and your reputation would increase because you'd be gathering more and more customers. And then it would be rinse and repeat. And basically you would grow. So it's very short-sighted of you not to effectively invest in what relatively would be a small amount compared to the potential of growth that you could be looking at. And I said, and until I can see that, I'm not going to recommend and place the orders. So I went to bed, and as you can imagine, the atmosphere was a little bit tense. But the next morning, the agent came rushing up to me as I was waiting in reception and said, Paula, we've been talking, and we're going to do what you say. And I said, well, that's fantastic news. And cut a long story short, they did. We placed the orders. They then grew, and they became one of the major suppliers to the UK. They became suppliers to some of the major customers in the US and elsewhere in the world. So when I say that the approach that we believe is so fundamental for diversity, equity, and inclusion is about hitting the social values plus the financial values, hopefully that illustrates what I mean by that, because in that case, their social values, you know, they created a better culture. They were able to attract great talents. They were able to retain great talents. And then obviously from the financial perspective, from their key performance indicators, their metrics and their numbers, they increased both the top line and the bottom line. And so we feel really that this is very much that diversity, equity and inclusion is just another lens through which to see transformative change in an organization. And one of the challenges that we see so often is that so many organizations, and quite understandably, if they're very much in the beginnings of their journey, where do we start? It tends to be with isolated projects that perhaps can get some, you know, some great splashy headlines across the organization. But it's really about understanding the root causes of why things aren't working now, and slowly over time, you know, making incremental changes, and then sharing that information with your key stakeholders. Because in organizations, you have your internal staff who are beginning to want to see change, because this movement is being driven, as Miles said in his introduction, very much from people under 40, the demographics of the millennials, the Generation Zs, and then the next generation that will follow on after those is the Generation Alphas. And these people are clamoring for change. So you have your internal stakeholders, your employees, particularly after lockdown, they're coming back and they're thinking, do you know, I've had time to sort of think about the company I'm working for, and do they really value me? Do they really value what I do? Do I feel I can bring my whole self to work? Are they going to allow me to, you know, work in a hybrid work environment? Do I feel that they're really caring for my mental health? All these other things, and questioning whether the organization is really the right place in which to work. And of course, that's causing people to what's called the great discontent. And then that moves on to now the great resignation. And I was reading some research recently in America, where they were saying that 7 out of 10 employees in America are either actively looking or passively looking to move jobs. So if you're in the HR department, certainly in America and possibly elsewhere in the world, you potentially are looking at 70% of your workforce walking out of the door if you and your fellow board members do not take on board the fact that, you know, things have got to change. So there's I can see someone has just said, as a millennial, I'm most likely to be loyal to a company that cares. Exactly that. The millennials, Generation Zs are questioning now. It's, you know, do you value me enough to actually keep me as an employee? So there's pressure coming from the internal stakeholders, if you will, but then equally, of course, there's the external stakeholders. There's the customers. And we learned through the lockdown, when so many organizations were forced to quickly move onto a digital platform, that suddenly this brand loyalty that they thought, oh, we can always rely on our customers, they'll go nowhere else. Well, suddenly it was very easy for them to just quickly glance and look and see and compare And brand loyalty suddenly wasn't quite as strong as was expected. People became very fickle and were happy to move, and customers are demanding this, and they're demanding of the board. You know, years ago, board members were hidden away. You didn't know. There might be the few odd superstars around, like Jack Welch and whatever, but most board members were hidden and were getting on with what they needed to do, and didn't really want to be bothered. Yes, of course, they were answerable to their investors, and I'll come back to that stakeholder group in a moment. But generally, you know, they were below the radar. Not anymore. Now, with social media, with everyone having websites where you've got the, you know, who are we, suddenly it's very, very easy to find out who are the board members of your organization. And it's very easy for external stakeholders, particularly customers, to communicate and to get their message and their views shown. So board members can no longer afford to they never could afford to ignore the views of their customers, but now it's much more in their face, and they have to be seen to be making changes. And then equally, coming back to investors as other external stakeholders, there are so many now ethical trusts, you know, where you've got the big investors who are investing on behalf of pension funds, etc. They are now demanding of boards and of organizations, show us your metrics, you know, your environmental, social and governance metrics, your ESGs. I want to see what you're achieving, and what are the initiatives you've got in place in order to move the needle and improve upon them. So that's causing issues. And then the last thing, of course, is the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Now, you know, back in 2015, 193 countries, was it, signed up to these 17 Sustainable Development Goals in order to, you know, end poverty and to protect the world that we live in. Well, that was 2015. We're now 2022. The actual target goal is 2030, and that's only 7.5 years away. I mean, we're absolutely, literally slap bang in the middle of it now. Miles mentioned about Expo 2020, which we were thrilled to be hosting here in Dubai. It opened on October the 1st, 2021. It was delayed because of COVID, but it was so focused on the principles of the SDGs. And of course, governments have signed up to this, so pressure's on for them to deliver. There are societal and there are commercial elements to this, but everybody has to work together. So governments are putting pressure, again, on companies, on the boards, to say, well, what are you doing about your gender equality? What are you doing about sustainable developments? How are you working towards achieving those sustainable development goals, those 17 goals that we, representing you, signed up to achieve by 2030? So there's this pressure that's happening more and more, and it's causing this. I noticed with Miles, you had the background of the ship on the sea, but we call it a sort of a perfect storm, really, because you've got the pressure from your millennials, your pressure from your Generation Zs, the stakeholders, the customers, the investors, the governments, etc. They're putting pressure on businesses. You've got the SDGs, as I said, that are putting pressure. There's also this enormous wealth of information and research that is coming out to say that it is just good for business, and everybody is putting the pressure on organizations to do something quickly. So, you know, that's really why we feel that, you know, from my perspective, as I said, I've been doing this for many, many years. And when I started, it was something that was very much on the edges of people's consciousness. And it was very much seen as a nice to have. And I do projects which perhaps would be, you know, to help the chief exec with a personal project that they had. But now I'm thrilled that now it's absolutely, you know, right in the heart and the center of the board agenda. But it has to be based on not just achieving the social targets, but also achieving those financial targets as well. And I'll just finish that, which might be something that will sort of lead on to prompting some of the questions. But I was reading some research recently that was done by, I think it was HR.com, and this was back in last year. And in this research, they asked nearly 400 HR professionals all sorts of issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these HR professionals, I think over 60% of them were working in large organizations. And one piece that really came out to me, which was that one of the questions was, what are you finding are the main areas that is preventing you from achieving success with your initiatives? And I remember it was almost neck and neck. They're all around a third. But the first one was that those asked said that they didn't have access to relevant diversity, equity, and inclusion related data. And because they didn't have access to the data, they couldn't show how their initiatives were benefiting the organization. And because they couldn't show the benefits, that meant that they were struggling to both gain and maintain leadership support. So coming back round to what I was saying about how we believe this is something that absolutely is critical and needs board level ownership and support. You know, you have to have the data to start and to show the incremental changes over time, because we can't just work on the principle that it seems the right thing to do and you come from the heart. And because, yes, of course, many of us know it's the right thing to do, but it has to we have to show the financial benefits as well as the social benefits. So I've been talking for ages now. So perhaps I don't know, Miles, if you want to sort of, shall I throw it back to you and see where we can go from there?
Yeah, sure. And I think for everybody as well, anybody that wants to, you know, ask a question, just raise a hand. But Paul, I think one of the statistics that I saw from you recently was you spoke about the Great Resignation, and it would seem that most of the people that have either lost their jobs or moved away from their jobs, particularly in America, are actually women, you know, so where we are trying to almost like a reversal in certain areas. You know, are you thinking that's just a temporary thing?
I lost some part of you then, Miles, but I think what you were asking, you said that, yes, the stats that I was sharing the other day said that I think it was from the International Labour Organization that 2/3 of the jobs lost during the pandemic were from women. Do I feel that that's a permanent situation? No, I don't. And I think that that partly this is partly through just sheer common sense, but also with the SDG 5, which is gender equality and women's empowerment, which is one of those vital SDGs that, you know, where the clock is ticking. You know, again, when you look at some of the stats, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly, but I think that the World Economic Forum have worked out that if the world employed women in equal measure to men, so gender parity in the workplace, as it were, then that would add something like an extra 23%. Or I can't remember the numbers now, but it's obviously it's in the trillions, and it's something like 28 trillion or something like that, $28 trillion to the global GDP. And they've also done that for all the various countries as well. So from a government perspective, from the global perspective, why would you just sit there and leave, if you like, progress and money on the table? And when you recognize that the goals of the SDGs, or the ultimate aim of the SDGs, is to not just protect the planet, but also to eliminate poverty. One of the key drivers of eliminating poverty is to employ women in meaningful jobs, and to also give them the skills, particularly in terms of upgrading their technical skills, so they can be empowered. And by empowered, I mean to reach their full potential. So I absolutely believe that this is something that is not permanent, but it does need both governments and businesses to accept that they have a responsibility to, move the needle and get these women back into the workforce, because it's good for society and it helps to eliminate poverty.
I'm just going to ask, maybe, and this might be a little bit more, maybe not a tougher question, but we often, when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about women, but we also have the focus of, the LGBTQIA plus and wherever, and we often sort of overlook that. Do you think that there's a move again to focus a little bit more on giving everybody an inclusive workplace, letting everybody feel like they belong? What's your experience been around that, Paula?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we talk about gender equality, and that means, all genders. That's treating everyone equally. We talk about cultural equality. We talk about age equality, a disability equality. I mean, we are talking about giving everybody an equal chance. And yes, I know that the headlines is obviously about women, but and what we've found is, and it's interesting because as you mentioned, Miles, we're here in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. I'm originally from the UK, and there are real differences in different countries, as we know, and obviously you're there in South Africa, and different countries are in different places along the diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, if you will. And when I look at the UK and I look at the US, they are far more advanced and further along the journey than here in UAE, and I'm assuming in some parts of Africa. So for them, that they're moving, that it's not just about gender equality, but for many countries, rather, one of the first, if you like, easier places to start is perhaps on the gender equality issue, because that's something that in a way everybody can understand. And it is about starting a momentum, isn't it? And you've got to break the inertia. And I was thinking the other day, actually, Miles, from the other conversation that we had, when we had one of the questions from somebody, and obviously I won't mention any detail, but we had a question from someone who said that in their organization, this topic wasn't even, being talked about. And how could they, just get the conversation, how could they get these topics onto the board agenda when it's not even being talked about? And I think that if you think back, it's just about, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to break the inertia and start some form of momentum. And it just starts with one person, literally, and it's maybe about getting together a special interest group, and finding other people in your organization who are of a like mind, and then gathering together, maybe meeting occasionally, inviting external speakers, and just begin to start to get a momentum going. And then maybe, I mean, we're working with a client who has this exact issue, and then what they did was they got to a stage, they had their special interest group, they got which got bigger and bigger. They started to survey members of the organization and found that actually there was quite a groundswell of feeling on the issue, which actually was gender equality. And then they managed to get someone from HR to join their steering committee, and then they were able to raise it up to become something to discuss by the board. So yes, that was gender equality, and that's one of the easier, I suppose, one of the topics that people can get behind more easily. But with all the other types of equalities, whether you're talking about, you know, the LGBTQ community or the, you know, age equality or cultural equality, all these aspects, yes, it is about providing equality for all.
Thank you, Paula. So I guess I want to hand it over to everybody that's on the call, anybody that wants to either share some experiences, share some ideas, ask Paula a question. The floor is open to you. Yeah, Colleen. Yeah, Colleen had told us that you were also talkative. So.
A very responsive group. Anybody wanting some advice? I mean, you've got the perfect person to give you advice in terms of your companies and that. Anybody on the call that is actually needing some advice on what you're doing and some of the projects that you're running internally?
Even just share some success. Yeah, share some success stories.
I was just thinking maybe I'll just sort of say something as well, just picking up Dipuo here, who said when we were talking about the pressure that millennials are putting on organizations. Just another rather lovely story to share with you while you're thinking. We were working with a tech company that had 4 offices, one in USA, UK, here in UAE, and also in Bangalore in India. And if you know anything about India, you'll know that Bangalore is like the Silicon Valley of India, and there are tech companies galore in Bangalore. And one of their challenges was how to attract the sort of the real high caliber of you know, data scientists, data engineers, all of the people that they needed to really drive their tech development. And of course, these are invariably in that age group I mentioned, the millennials and the Generation Zs. They're all under 40. And because their headquarters was based in Bangalore, it was really difficult to attract this top talent because everyone was fighting for the same top talent. You know, they'd be coming out of universities and they'd be snapped up, and it was all about, you know, offering the highest salaries and the greatest benefits and all that sort of thing. And they couldn't afford to offer the top salaries. But anyway, we ran our diagnostic with this organization, and it was fantastic. They came out with such a high overall diversity, equity and inclusion score. They also came out with a very high inclusive culture score. And so they said, can we share this information? And we said, well, of course, it's your information. So they shared it in press cuttings and releases and things. And of course, what happened was that suddenly the reversal occurred. That whereas before they were scratching around to find the real key talent, suddenly that talent was beating a path to their door. because they wanted to work for a company that shared their values. And it wasn't about being paid, you know, the biggest salary. It wasn't being about, you know, that, I don't know, going on away days and going on to yachts and all this sort of thing. It was about what was the purpose of the organization, and did it align with their goals and their own personal sort of purpose. And suddenly, as I said, the whole situation turned around. So it's exactly what that comment about, you know, you'll be loyal to a company that really values you. And this is why this is so important now with this whole great resignation that's going on globally. I can see we've got some comments coming in now. So what have we got here? I think this is from Varma in Cape Town. I think getting a small group running a great idea. However, if you're in an organisation that still sees and talks about gender, for instance, in binary terms, it seems pertinent that this level of change is affected from higher up and included in mandatory training, etc. Well, absolutely. As I mentioned, if anything is really going to change, it absolutely has to ultimately have board level support, ownership, accountability. And in our view, you know, we would like to see the targets being included in board level targets, whereby, you know, they're what's the word? It's just gone out of my head. But sorry?
The KPIs.
They're KPIs, but they're linked to their incentives, yes, and the extra money that they get. I can't remember the name for that right now. Someone will suddenly remember it. But, you know, linking that, because of course, if you link things to people's pay packet, then things tend to happen. But yes, and it is about getting those conversations going and finding the groundswell of opinion and finding where the pain points are for people. Because if you can then elevate that and to propose a solution, because it's not just about elevating the pain points, but also to come up with a solution of how those pain points could be relieved, and hopefully linking it to how it would impact, as I said, the financial values of the organization. So if you're, you know, one doesn't want to get threatening, but just, you know, join the dots that if this is not resolved, if it's a real issue in your organization and it's not resolved, then what's going to happen? It's likely that, first of all, people are going to walk. Secondly, in this era of social media, you know, with platforms like Glassdoor, where people can post their views about how they were treated and what they believe the culture of an organization to be, very rapidly, your reputation will begin to be impacted. So you're absolutely right. It is about, you know, getting that change to be accepted at a higher level, and then to, as you say, included in the sort of training that's involved to educate people to understand some of the issues and pain points that people are feeling. And it does require sensitivity. People have to feel that they're psychologically safe to be able to share. And this is not a quick fix. It takes time. But, you know, there are all sorts of methodologies and ways of handling that. But you're absolutely right. It has to come from the top.
I see Depur has a question. Depur?
Hi, everyone. My question is just, I don't even know how to phrase it, but let's say, for example, that you, like, I find the norm or the culture in SA is that companies would portray this ideology that they align with your values, and they'll sell you that idea. But as you join the company and as you are part of the organization, you realize that they don't actually mean it. They just create these things to tick boxes so that they are accepted in their industries. But in actual fact, what they say they do and what they do doesn't align. So my question then is, how then do we go about like encouraging organizations to not just do things to tick boxes, but to actually do them to bring true meaning?
Yeah, I mean, we see this a lot. I mean, people talk about greenwashing, don't they? And there is this sort of same equivalent with diversity, equity, and inclusion washing as well. And I think it comes back to the principles that we were chatting about just earlier. Is that, you know, if there is an issue that you feel is being glossed over and is not authentic and genuine, start to find your group that hold views similarly, and explore, you know, the face of where they are at the moment, and where you believe they should be, and then begin to gather the momentum and to find, if you have enough momentum and enough voices, you know, that you can then take to, you can perhaps start by addressing it at perhaps a slightly lower level than the director of HR or something, but, you know, get your people from HR on your side so that you can then take it up, to elevate it and raise it up so that it can actually be addressed. That you, and when you've got enough people who are responding and feeling and reflecting your view, then that's when change, you know, it can't be ignored, and something would have to change. But it is something, it definitely, this idea of box ticking is very, very common, and we find that with organizations who perhaps talk about using their annual employee engagement survey or something, and the challenge with that is that often organizations, you know, they do it every year and everybody takes a deep sigh and goes, here we go again, and completes it because it's mandatory, they have to do it, but then nothing happens. So it's maybe pulling out some of those issues where you feel, you know, they're not really peeling back the layers of the onion and looking down deep to find the root cause of some of these issues, and that's why there is some discontent. But that's my advice, I would say. I mean, you know, what we do is we would come in and then we would understand where the pain points are, and then we would do the analysis and provide the actual data to show where the issues are, where the pain points or where the, you know, the root causes of these you know, so-called greenwashed issues are. But that's what I would say. If that's not a solution, then just, as I say, start a movement, start a momentum, and gather together. You know, because when you've got you know, a significant number of people feeling the same way, it is very hard to ignore.
Paula, we got a comment here from Samantha. It says, have you worked with any South African companies? What are your thoughts of the impact of our unique context on the issue of DE&I? And I'm guessing, you know, I've spoken to you, Paula, about this before, where we come from the apartheid era. We've been obviously trying to resolve that over the last almost 30 years. But we still see that most of the top positions in organizations, there's still a very unequal number of, let's put it, white males at the top level. So, you know, again, and maybe because I know that you haven't worked specifically within the South African company, but maybe just tell us what's happened in the UAE, because obviously, you know, traditionally we know that Arab cultures were very male dominated, but something is definitely happening in the UAE. Maybe you can share from that context.
Certainly, and you're absolutely right, Miles. There is a lot happening over here, and it makes me smile, of course, because people have their preconceptions about this region, and usually they're wrong. If I say that the UAE a few years ago, when there was what's called the Global Gender Equality Index, which I think is can't remember which organisation provides that, whether it's the World Economic Forum or the UN, but the Global Gender Equality Index, the UAE some years ago were very much sort of scraping along the bottom, along with a lot of the rest of the GCC countries. And then when it was published a couple of years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the UAE was at number 19. This is extraordinary, to be number 19 in the world on gender equality. And I spoke about Expo 2020. That was a massive, massive project that's headed by a woman. We have 50% of ministers here in UAE are women. The head of the Mars Commission, the Mars project, sending the probe to Mars, that's headed by a woman here. And so there's an enormous amount of work that's being done here. I think what's happened is that I always describe the political setup here in the kindest possible way of saying that we have what I would call a benign dictatorship here, because it's very tribal. We have 7 emirates. The United Arab Emirates is made of 7 emirates. Each emirate reflects the land that the nomadic tribe used to occupy, and each nomadic tribe, of course, has its leader, the sheikh, which is Arabic for king. And so we have the 7 sheikhs, and they can, although they have their councils and they have their ministers and things, ultimately the final decisions sit with them. And here in Dubai, the Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, he has got real vision and is driving the female agenda here. And as Miles, you said, at the Expo 2020, we had a women's pavilion, which was the first time in an expo that women had their own pavilion, and it was really to highlight this idea about gender equality. But I realized that that's not the same in other countries, and there is a lot of work to be done. The other thing I would say in response to that comment is that the research is there. Again, I don't have it right in front of me, but I know that, for instance, there is research that shows that if you have more women on the board, you are likely to achieve an increase of up to 41% increase in return on equity, a 56% increase on operating results. Gender diverse companies perform 15% better than non-gender diverse companies. If you have, for every 1 woman on the board, then women within an organisation have a 26% better chance of promotion, because having at least 1 woman on the board shows that there is, the mentoring, perhaps the culture, the support, the sponsorship involved, and that women can see that they have a role model that they can aspire to. And so it goes on. I could reel off so much more. The fact is that although, as you said, Miles, that most of the companies in South Africa are run by white middle-aged men, I think that, and I hope that that will change soon, because frankly they are missing out on the financial opportunity of achieving more if they had women on the board. And I know that I was reading just recently, now what's his name, is it Keith Allen or Keith Adam, I can't remember, but one of the guys on a shark attack. I don't know whether you're familiar with shark attack. This is this is like it's a television program where entrepreneurs pitch their ideas, and you have investors who will choose whether to invest or not. And this guy is one of the investors on Shark Attack in the US, and he was saying that he likes to invest in companies that are run by women because women are naturally are more risk averse. And so they look after his money better. So he gets a better return on his investment if he invests in companies that are run by women. So, you know, and this is just adding to the research that's available. I mean, you know, I don't want to sound as if I'm a man basher, because I'm certainly not. I'm just trying to point out that everyone's leaving money on the table by ignoring the value of having women throughout your organization, but particularly in management roles. So I'm sure it can only be a matter of time. And again, I would say, start the movement, start the momentum. You know, it has to start somewhere. If we look back on, you know, what was it, a couple of years ago, that dreadful issue in George Floyd in America, that started a whole movement and of Black Lives Matter. And, you know, this is how it happens in this day and age of social media.
Yeah, thanks. And then we have another comment from Adele. So it's very similar to one before, but I just want to read it out because there's the end part that is important. Hi, Paula. DE&I often becomes an HR-led topic, HR being more vocal and driving it in the organization. How do you get an organization to shift to be more leader-led when it comes to DE&I? And then are you able to share success stories? I think we've spoken about the KPIs, etc. Can you share a success story with us on that?
On what the
leader, more leader-led, yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say that with the client that we actually no, I've just thought, yes, there was this client that we were working with. They're very much in a similar situation to the one that we're talking about. So it's quite a large organization, and that the issues, and I am going to talk again about gender equality, but gender equality was not something that was on the agenda. And it was very male dominated, and it had, I won't say a toxic culture, but it had a very sort of male culture. It was an organization that was absolutely driven by sales. That's not to say that organizations can't be driven by sales, of course not. But you know, that was the overarching. They had a lot of salespeople. They were all men. Most of them were men. It was very, very sales driven, and it was, you know, it was very sort of lots of testosterone around and what have you. And there was just a view amongst some of the females that this needed to change, and they weren't feeling comfortable, and they wanted to change and get more women through the organization, and particularly on the board. So they created this special interest group. They started to gain more and more support from within the organization. They got speakers in, they got somebody in from HR. They then changed their name to the Gender Balance Council, and they started to petition and really to petition the board. And that was beginning to motor, to be honest. I will say that then, by happenstance and luck, the chief executive at the top changed. I think it was also aligned with the fact that they weren't doing their numbers. So the chief executive changed. A new guy came in, and they were able to sort of tackle him very, very quickly before he'd really got his feet under the table. And but it also turned out that he could see this movement and groundswell of opinion, and he realized that if he was going to you know, achieve his vision for the organization, that this was also something that had to be included. So that this is now absolutely on the agenda. It's being driven from the top. Now, you would say to me, oh, that's because it changed chief exec, but actually that was happening. That was moving forward. And I believe that it perhaps wouldn't have happened so quickly, but it would have happened. I believe so. But I, you know, at the risk of repeating myself, I just feel that it comes from below. You start it from below. If you haven't got support from the top, start your momentum, get your movement happening and from below, and then get them to realize that the strength of opinion and how something must change. Obviously, from the other perspective, that the board need to understand that you know, if they want to achieve greater profitability, greater revenues, greater performance, they want to keep their best staff, they want to maintain or improve their reputation, all of these KPIs, then to ignore these issues would be foolish.
Thank you, Paula. I've got quite a long one from Hildegard. Any ideas for bringing these ideas home and making them a reality in the workplace? How to respect colleagues irrespective of our differences and to treat everyone as equal, to not try and isolate or frown on people's differences, but to value people. I find that we are really not doing enough and people just keep quiet about this accepted culture, but it's been going on for so long. Sadly, it has become accepted behavior. Managers definitely need to receive training on these principles to eradicate this.
Well, absolutely. And it is about, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, because it all comes down to, well, it's not all, but a lot of it is to do with unconscious bias, isn't it? We all have them. It makes us human, you know. I don't know whether I'll throw in one here. Some of you may know, but there's a great little story that I use to illustrate this, that a father and a son go on a car journey. There's a tragic accident. The father dies. The son is taken to hospital. And the surgeon, upon seeing the boy, says, I cannot operate on this boy, for he is my son. And of course, you know, we all sort of like, really? I thought the father had died. And of course, the answer is that the surgeon is his mother. And the reason why, you know, people are bemused and puzzled beforehand is because we have this unconscious bias, because most surgeons around the world are male. And there is all sorts of unconscious biases that we have in place. They make us human. But what the answer is, and it does take time, but it's having spaces, it's having a program whereby people can come and share their views, to express in a psychologically safe place, you know, some of their challenges, to almost get people to understand how to walk a mile in their shoes, sort of thing, and the impact of their behaviors and how it affected them. And you maybe will not change people's deep held beliefs, but what you can do is you can put in place a culture that is more understanding and respectful. You may, you know, you have to accept that you can't sometimes change, but you absolutely can develop a culture that is more respectful. But that does take time, and, you know, there are sort of processes, but it needs acceptance from senior board level members, and very much that this is the way we're going to approach, and with sort of HR taking the lead perhaps to set up, you know, discussion forums where people can feel safe to share, and then to get the conversations about these issues, and to ensure that people can then begin to respect the differences and challenge their views. But it doesn't happen overnight, of course. But that's the way that's one of the methods that we advise.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Then from Lolly, in your experience, what are the practices and experiences that create inner transformation for decision makers on appointing more excluded groups? That is to say, beyond just complying with targets, appointing and supporting to retain. I know a lot of what you said applies to this, but is there anything, I like the concept of the inner transformation. So it's not forced transformation, it's transformation that businesses just start, you know, like a groundswell, like you've been talking about.
Absolutely. Well, you're absolutely right. And this is one of the challenges that we often see, that people will there'll be a knee-jerk reaction, perhaps, let's say from an investor, a key investor who comes in and says, or the government, you know, you've got to have, you know, a quota, or there's a, I mean, I'm not a great fan of quotas, because quotas tend to come with you know, penalties, which is not a good idea. But sometimes if someone's really not moving at all, maybe that's the kickstart they need. But certainly you have your targets, and perhaps, you know, government is saying, right, you've got a target to achieve 40% of women throughout the organisation by 2025, let's say. And then there's this knee-jerk reaction going, right, from now on, you know, only we only want to recruit women, and we only want to promote women, because we've got to get these, we've got to hit the targets, you know, panic, panic, panic. And of course, that's a disaster, because what that will do is effectively just turn off all those talented, let's say, males, you know, who are being ignored, and they will leave, they will be disgruntled, and they will damage your reputation. So what is the answer? The answer is that it has to be done by understanding, first of all, the root cause as to why women are not being promoted, or why women are not staying in their position. Because as with all things, you know, just sort of getting the numbers of women up is just putting, you know, that's a symptom. But what's the actual root cause of why you have such imbalance? So when you understand the root causes, that perhaps it's because, I don't know, maybe the wording that's being used in recruitment, you know, adverts is more biased towards men, or whether, you know, when it comes to actually the recruitment process, you know, let's take everybody's application forms and remove their names and their photographs and any sort of reference to gender, so that people can truly appoint the right person for the job, by ignoring all the other issues about gender. So that's when, and you have to start that way, and then gradually that then becomes sort of embedded within the sort of psyche of the individuals and into the DNA of the organisation. But your point about it becoming, you know, non-conscious, then that is something that happens when you've worked at it for some time, and so it becomes more intuitive rather than having to think about it. But you've got to go through the pain of forcing people, using various techniques and things, but forcing people to do things differently, but by understanding the root cause. Because as I said, if you just paper over the cracks of the problem, and then, you know, appoint women in positions without the proper support, without the proper mentoring, without the proper training, and of course there are many women, we see it so many times, who suffer from imposter syndrome, who maybe are offered opportunities, but they feel, oh no, I don't want to take the promotion because I'm being set up to fail, or, oh, you know, they're going to find me out that I can't do it. I remember reading somewhere that if you have a job application, men will apply for a job application if they feel that they fulfill up to about 60% of the criteria. Women will apply if they feel they fulfill 100% of the criteria. So there are all these challenges that we have, and sometimes the challenges come from within us. So we talk about the glass ceiling that needs to be broken outside, but there's almost a glass ceiling inside some of us. But it does take time. So you sort of challenge some of the norms and the processes that you have existingly to get to the point where you've tackled the root causes, and then it becomes more intuitive.
It says, has there been indication as to the extent, if any, the pull her down syndrome impacts women, pulling other women up as they rise, mainly driven by the limited spaces perceived to be available in the still highly masculine dominated world of work and society?
Absolutely. I can't give you an absolute example, but I know that with some of the embedded prejudices that we have, one of them is, I'm trying to remember what it's similar to the pull her down syndrome, but it's where if you get perhaps a group of women who are competing for one position, they often will demonstrate certain prejudices. No, what am I saying? That when people will have their unconscious biases about women, and they will then sort of demonstrate those unconscious biases even more in order to get the position. So, and what I mean is that if one of the unconscious biases is that women, you know, this difference of that if you use a word like assertive, if you apply that to a man, that's considered to be very positive. If you apply it to a woman, it's seen to be negative. So that a woman will, if you get a group of women sort of trying to go for one position and they're in competition with each other, then sometimes they will show this sort of, I'm not the assertive one, I'm very female, I'm very empathetic, you know, I work with teams in a very sort of gentle way, and they will sort of reinforce some of those unconscious biases in order to beat their fellow females. So in a way, they're pulling them down by showing, oh, well, we're sort of demonstrating those female traits that you, the male, the team that are deciding on this position, we're even more going to show our female traits in order to succeed, if that makes sense. But I'm trying to, yeah, so it is one of the issues of unconscious bias. Incidentally, while I'm on this, one of the other big unconscious bias areas is that some may be able to respond to is what's known as the maternal wall. And this is where women who come back after having had a baby, that people assume that they can't possibly be as effective and as efficient as they were before having their baby, because surely their first priority is with their child. And so they're not offered the promotions that they want to. But I will say that I was talking to one client a little while ago, this lady who's very, very high-powered marketeer. She was excellent, but she was in a sort of, you know, quite middle management role. And I said, Helen, what about you? You're talking about trying to bring the women up further into the organization, and you're all about empowering women, and you've got this special interest group and one thing and another. What about yourself? What about you? And she went, oh no, she said, I don't think I'll be going any further, because I don't think the management will let me, you know, still do the school run and, you know, get off and support my child. And I went, wait a moment, you're doing that now? And you're also exceeding all expectations. Why should it be any different? You know, so there was an example that she felt that was the sort of, you know, the was holding her back, you know, that it wasn't even that it was coming from outside. She herself was holding herself back with the sort of maternal wall. But the maternal wall is something that tends to happen where people externally believe that women couldn't possibly be as good as they were beforehand. But anyway, I just threw that in. It's not to do with the pull her down syndrome of that question, but I thought it was interesting to share.
Thank you, Paula. So the next one is more comment, but something that we can talk about, and it was also supported by one of the other attendees. So it's from Wendell, says, I have to drop off at 10, so unfortunately Wendell's no longer with us, but I'm always concerned about the lack of men are not participating and or excluded from these critical conversations. And then Natasha said, true, Wendell, during a Women in Mining conference recently, only 3 men attended out of 300.
I missed the very start of that, Miles. You dropped off.
Okay. So I'm always concerned about the lack of representation of men in these conversations. So how do we really drive change if men are not in the conversations?
I couldn't agree more. It involves everybody, and there are some, I meet some absolutely incredible men who are really, really supportive of this agenda, and they recognise the value that women bring. And as I said, I don't want to come across as a man hater or anything like that. Nothing could be further from the truth. It just sort of happens when you're starting to talk about female, or rather gender equality and helping women to get to the top, that it becomes very sort of focused on females. But absolutely, men are essential in the process. And men who recognise that this is absolutely an important topic and that everybody benefits when more women are involved. Again, the stats show that if you've got women who perhaps are in middle management, that the culture of an organisation is more enjoyable for everybody. That people feel that they are more valued for everybody. Therefore, sales are higher. There is less absenteeism. There's less attrition, etc., etc. And men recognise that. So it's all about working together. And that we can't do it on our own. So it is absolutely about getting men involved.
I think Paul sort of adds on to that by saying, sadly, it sometimes feels like in South Africa, you have to be one of the boys to be recognized and included. And sometimes it's also, you talk about the unconscious bias, you see people used to go and do business on the golf course. And often that was a white male dominated sport in South Africa. Now it's a male dominated sport. So we need to think consciously about how we do these things. Otherwise, it will always just feel like being the boys' club.
Absolutely. I remember talking to someone who was working for an organization. She was in a sales team that was predominantly male. The manager was male. And she said, she would, if she was a little bit sort of the last one to, not late to a meeting, but if she was the last one to arrive to a sales meeting, as she'd walk in, sometimes like everyone would stop talking. And the reason was because they were all talking about football or whatever, and then suddenly she arrived. So, we'll stop talking, and it's like, no, guys, come on. I can talk about football too, or let's talk about something else, it can be a bit of a challenge sometimes, but you just have to keep the conversations going and recognize that it's recognizing that some of these things happen and being sensitive to them, and that's where you get these conversations where people can share some of these unconscious activities that they're doing and how it's impacting other people. That's where the change happens.
Good, thank you. So really lots of still good. So we're keeping you going here, Paula. Good stuff. Yes. From De Niro, we've got, unfortunately, there are tons of organizations that are conflict averse, that even when there are serious DEI issues, raising these topics may be viewed as career limiting, or people raising this may be seen as troublemakers. There must be more than just the impacted concerned groups trying to come together. Truthfully, there are many companies that are unable to create a safe space for these types of conversations. Now, I know you chatted a lot about that. But is there anything else you want to add after that comment, after that input?
I know in it I can't change the world overnight. I wish I could. I do think that change will happen, and at the risk of repeating myself, but you know, we talk about the millennials and the Generation Z, these people under 40. Now, statistically, and you know, you just, if as the Americans say, do the math. You know, they're under 40 now, so they are projected to become 75% of the global working population in the next sort of 15 or so years. And coming right behind them are your Generation Alphas. This clamoring for change is not going to go away. It, in fact, is going to get louder. So these organizations that, you know, where they just got their, I feel they've got their heads in the sand and they think, no, we don't have to deal with this now. This is not our problem. Yeah, we hear about it, whatever, but let's just crack on and let's keep things the same. They are becoming rapidly dinosaurs, in my view. The change is happening. Governments are soon going to, I mean, I believe, actually, Miles, is it true that there are government imposed targets in South Africa for, is it percentages of women on the board, or certainly percentage of people of colour on the board or something? Are those targets that have been introduced by government?
Yeah, so we do have, each sector has their scorecards, their broad-based Black economic empowerment, as well as our employment equity scorecards that companies are meant to abide by and also report on annually. But I don't think that the impact of not actually abiding by those is not significant. There are lots of companies that are doing a lot of great work, but I still think we've got a heck of a long way to go in South Africa to get true equality. And you know, you spoke about inherent bias, and you know, we often have that issue as well in South Africa, where even people that are trying to deal with issues are sometimes, because of the inherent bias, are still not contributing as much as they should. I see Colleen's got her hand up, so I'm sure she's going to add some in here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. Paula, I also think, I mean, especially from a South Africa perspective, and where we've really found the movement happening, is previously there was a lot happening, but if you spoke to individuals and said to them, well, you know, what is happening, the stories weren't being told. So gender in South Africa looked like this little program that nobody was doing. And I think the more of us that are working in the right direction, I did put a note in the chat, the more of us that are working in the right direction, telling the stories, breaking down the silos, showing how big gender is, impact will start happening. And I think the thing is, though, I think everybody's wanting to have it tomorrow or even yesterday. They don't want to wait. But the problem is if you don't do the sustainable change, it will not have that impact that we're looking for. So it will change just because of a quota, or it will change just because somebody said we must do it, not necessarily because the culture of the organization says, I must do it because this is what's in it for me. And this is the benefit that will bring, and I will be a lot happier and I'll be a lot richer. And so I think the thing is to understand that whatever change happens, it must be because the company buys into it.
Absolutely.
You know, you might start off with quotas to get a movement happening, but unless you actually have the full buy-in of that company, it will change today, and at the end of the year we'll be on this treadmill because the change will just revert back to normal. Yes. And so I think that's what we need to understand, that it's more sustainable change we're looking for, impact on the ground.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that picking up on your point about the business issue and going back to what I was saying about, you know, to get really the organisation, the board to buy in. It's to focus in on the financial benefits of taking this view. That it is going to be good for everybody. It's the social benefits as well as the financial benefits. But, you know, I mean, like it is about incremental change. You know, we've got so much going on here. We've got all of the unconscious biases. We've, as you say, it's no good to just, you know, suddenly achieve those targets without really understanding the root causes. And if you're changing root causes, that can take time. I mean, I remember we had one client where they had an issue with the culture. We were actually engaged by the head of HR, but she knew that there was a cultural issue and that and she was losing valuable millennials. And when we ran the data, just one tiny little thing that came up was that the parents, and there was a feeling that there was inequality between parents and non-parents. The fact that the parents were being allowed to leave early to do the school run, the non-parents had to stay to the bitter end. So it was just a very simple and relatively easy fix to essentially say that, you know, rather than being, you know, for an announcement to be made that it was no longer about how many hours you spend in the office. It's about achieving, you know, the objectives and the goals you've been given, and quite how you achieve that is up to you. If you don't want to come into the office and you find that it's going to be better to work from home, then you can do. And if you want to leave early, it's okay. You know, what matters is that you achieve your targets, your goals, etc. It's not how long you stay in the office. That one tiny little change, I say tiny, I mean it was fairly momentous, but on paper is not a massive change. And it had such a knock-on effect that people, first of all, felt that they were being listened to, that having engaged in this process, whereby they were asked to, you know, express their opinions, that now change was happening. And it was a tiny incremental change, but then the knock-on effect meant that people felt that something was happening. So, and then another small change later on, etc. So it is about stages. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is also ultimately linking it back to, you know, the bottom line and the top line, and how that's going to help the organisation. And the research is there in its droves to show what can happen. And as I've given a few examples of, you know, in real life, as how this approach has impacted, and you know that the company has benefited, and the board, as a result, is absolutely behind it, and the momentum has started and will continue and grow. But it's not going to go away, this conversation, because these stakeholders who are 40 and below want to see change, and those who are staunchly going, that's not for us, will get left behind.
No, thank you, Paula. I just want to, so I recognize some of the questions from Bridget and from Agnes, but I think we most probably already answered those to some extent. But if you believe we haven't, then please just push me to ask that. But I think we've most probably answered that. I just wanted to really read what Colleen had said, and I think you've just touched on that again, Paula. It is why it is so important to make it mainstream and not a woman's issue, but a business issue. We also want sustainable change, not a revolution that is not sustainable. Change might not be happening as fast as we want it to, but with more of us So that was from Colleen, and then just the last one from Celeste, and then I'll hand over to you, Paula, to most promoted for my gender, but because the promotion is deserved based on my work output. So that's a great point, Celeste. Thank you. Okay, Paula. So I think, yeah. So over to you.
Yes, no, I just absolutely, Celeste, that's absolutely right. And in fact, just very briefly, just touching on that, there's a lovely story about that some of you may have heard of. It was an orchestra in America. I'm going to say the New York Philharmonic, but I don't think it was them, but never mind. And it was about 10 years ago, and they realized that they had got within their musicians, their proportion of musicians was they had only 5%, I think, of female musicians. And so they realized they needed to recruit more female musicians. But exactly picking up on your point, Celeste, it wasn't about bringing in female musicians just for the sake of it. And so they held blind auditions, and it meant that the candidates had to play on a stage but behind a curtain. And as an extra added twist, they were asked to remove their shoes, so that the assessing committee couldn't tell whether the people were wearing stilettos or not, or high heels. And as a result of those blind auditions, the number of female female musicians went up to 35%. So you're absolutely right. It is about people, being recognised for their talent rather than their gender. But I think that in terms of a wrap up, I think that there's a lot to be done. Yes, it can sometimes feel a little bit as if you're trying to push custard uphill. Is a long journey ahead. However, take comfort from the fact that this agenda is not going to go away. The voices will get louder, and that change doesn't happen because someone else does it. It can happen because of you. Rosa Parks deciding not to sit on the back of the bus. These changes can happen because of individuals. You can start a change. You can start a movement and a momentum if you so wish, and be reassured that there are external forces, there are demographic changes, there are governments who need to be seen to be delivering, and that those voices will get louder and louder. You'll be supported by customers, you'll be supported by investors, you'll be supported by fellow employees. So please don't give up. And obviously, if your organization needs real help to show the change and provide the data so that your organization can, your leaders can really buy into the change and see the financial benefit, then you know where to find me. But generally, this change is happening, and it's going to be happening sooner than you think, in my opinion. So hang on in there, and we'll get there.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. I think I'm going to hand that back to Colleen to close off for us. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I think we're all having a bit of technical issues this morning. I'm putting on my camera and it's turning me off. So, but yeah, Paula and Miles, thank you so much. Paula, I think the wisdom that you shared with us was absolutely fantastic. I think the thing though is just, I think more people need to be gravitating together to showcase how big the issue is. And showcase how many people are really working on it. And I mean, as you said, with all of us working together, the voices are going to get bigger. And we're really going to see the change. And I always say, the World Economic Forum is talking about, like, what's it now, 200 years, I think, or I think they might have reduced it slightly. But I always say I'm not going to be around for 200 years. So it's got to happen sometime in my life. So hopefully we'll see that change. But Paula and Miles, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate it. Anybody that needs any further help from Paula and Miles, let me know. And we'll gladly put you in touch with them. And yeah, and if there's no further input from everybody else, I think you're getting lots of thank yous in the chat box, Paula. So really appreciate the time you've taken to be with us this morning. And have a great day, everybody. And yeah, keep warm, and hopefully you don't get impacted by too much load shedding today. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks so much.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye now.